After the storm, a YNN special. Now, here's Steve Ferentz.
Earlier this year, in late summer, two massive storms born over ocean waters made their way into New York State in the span of 10 days. They caused catastrophic damage, the likes of which hasn't been seen in generations, if ever. And the damage caused wasn't necessarily from the sheer power of the storms, the wind, so much as the rain, the flooding left in their wake. Over the next hour, we will bring you to those days in late August and September. We will share with you those very personal stories from those who were most affected. And we will bring you insight from the political powers who made key decisions that formed the basis for the government's response to the storms. And it's with those storms that we begin, how they could have become so big and caused so much damage. For that perspective, we go to our chief meteorologist, Michael Goldrick.
There was a series of unfortunate events that led up to the historical and catastrophic flooding that occurred throughout the Catskills, all the way over to Binghamton, working over through Albany, Pittsfield, up into southern Vermont, Poughkeepsie, Newburgh, throughout the lower Hudson Valley, right down to the city of New York. Many of those communities had above average snowfall throughout the winter, and even into the spring season, above average snowfall, above average rainfall. As a matter of fact, many of those communities only had 2 months, January and July, where precipitation was below average. The other months were above to well above average precipitation. Throughout the summer months, we had many thunderstorms that were popping up every few days. That kept the water table high, and it also kept the creeks, the streams, the rivers running higher than they normally would during what is typically the drier months of the summer. On top of the above average snowfall and rainfall that set us up for that flooding in August and September, what really did it and what made it so catastrophic was that we had a Hurricane Irene, that developed near the Windward Islands, stayed well offshore Florida, clipped eastern North Carolina, worked right over the city and right into the lower Hudson Valley. As those tropical systems make landfall, they bring out the rainfall. And boy, this one did. Irene dropped 2 to 3 inches of rain on Binghamton, throughout the Catskills, Sullivan, Delaware County, saw a good 6 inches of rain out of that, and right up through the Hudson Valley, from Poughkeepsie, Newburgh, Albany, and into the Berkshires and on into the Green and White Mountains of Vermont. Locally, a foot of rain fell. That was in August. In September, we had the remnants of Tropical Storm Lee. Now, that low came off the Gulf of Mexico, developed in a different place, but it was just rich with moisture, tropical moisture. And as that went up into Ohio, it ran into a frontal system, a cold front that stalled right over the Appalachians. That cold front couldn't head out into the Atlantic because at the same time there was another hurricane, Hurricane Katia. That was well out in the Atlantic, but it was kind of blocking the progression of weather systems from west to east across the northeastern part of the country. Anytime you get tropical moisture interacting with a front, you can really crank out the rain. That rain started to fall the night of September 6th throughout the Catskills and right along the spine of the Appalachians, and then we just had rounds of intense rainfall. The Doppler radar estimates, they use an algorithm based on how hard it's raining over an extended period of time. They actually have observation sites located throughout the state. And that was indicating anywhere from 5, 10, 15, maybe in some cases nearly 20 inches of rain that fell from that system. So you combine Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee throughout a large part of our area. Many communities saw, 10, 20 inches of rain, almost a season's worth of rain in a short period of time over the course of a few days. And that's when Binghamton and many of the communities in the southern tier on the west side of the Catskills started to deal with their catastrophic and in many occurrences historical flooding all along the Susquehanna River. Believe it or not, most of the fatalities, most of the damage caused by tropical systems is not necessarily right on the coast. Sure, you get a lot of wind damage, storm surge damage there, but the big problem with a tropical system is from that fresh water flooding, the rain as they rain themselves out. We had so much rain in a short period of time, it just overwhelmed initially the storm drainage systems. We started getting the water ponding and pooling pooling in the urban areas, the villages. Then we saw a lot of the creeks and streams become overwhelmed. A lot of culverts were washed out because they're designed to handle a certain amount of water based on the historical data. Well, this was unprecedented. It was an unprecedented event for many communities. So initially you get the flash flooding. That flooding comes up quick and it goes down fairly quickly. And eventually it all funneled into the larger rivers. And they were just completely overwhelmed. And even some of the larger rivers rose up pretty quick. Usually the larger the waterway, the longer it takes for it to rise up. And then the hard part, the worst part probably with some of the larger rivers, it takes them a long time to recede, to go down, because all that water is just continuing to slowly drain down into them. You know, a lot of people have asked, was this a 100-year flood? Was it a 500-year flood? Was it a 1,000-year flood? Well, that comes down to statistics. You know, a 1,000-year flood just gives you an idea of how often you might see that flood, but in reality, a 1,000-year flood could happen each and every year. Hopefully we'll never have to deal with anything like this in our lifetime, but I can pretty much guarantee you at some point, whether it's 10 years from now, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, it'll happen again, and it could even be worse.
The storms hit hard and had a profound impact on many communities throughout the state, from the Hudson Valley to the Albany Capital Region to the southern tier. Few areas were spared nature's wrath. Streams, creeks, and rivers like the one you see, many of them jumped their banks, causing scenes of destruction that many still can't believe.
I'll never forget the noises, the sound, and prayed for my life. My husband's too.
I thought it was just going to take me away. Was that strong?
My home is gone as far as I know.
It was the stuff that you see on TV, you know, the stuff that never happens in your community.
But on August 28, 2011, the unimaginable did happen. Tropical storm Irene dumped up to a foot of rain onto communities in the Catskills and Mohawk Valley, causing unprecedented flash flooding and destruction.
We believe at the end of the day, the total damage will be close to $1 billion. Over 600 homes destroyed, 6 towns inundated, 150 major highways have been damaged, 22 state bridges closed.
Governor Cuomo made this bleak announcement from Greene County in the town of Prattsville. This small Catskill community was one of the hardest hit by the storm. Here, thankfully, Irene didn't take any lives, but local leaders said she did damage 119 homes and businesses.
There was a lot of displaced folks. That first night we had some 80 folks staying with us.
And this is what the town of Prattsville looks like just a day after the tropical storm Irene hit the area. As you can see, flooding was the real issue here. The whole town has just been devastated. Trees uprooted, houses underwater, businesses just flooded all through.
I'm heartbroken for all the people in our town because it's destroyed. It's destroyed.
3 months later, and this town still looks like a war zone. Pieces of houses are on the sidewalk. Some are even sunken into the ground. But Williams says the work that has been done so far has been at the hands of many volunteers.
6,000 volunteers logging over 30,000 man hours. So it's been an incredible effort that's given the entire community a lift. We know that's going to be a 1 to 2 year process to really get everybody back to pre-flood status. But we think it's going to be a better Prattsville, really, when all's said and done.
Just north of Prattsville is Schoharie County, where most communities are in the same position. Planning Director Alicia Terry says 1,100 structures were damaged countywide.
We had about 12 feet of water in the house.
This right here was my kitchen.
As in the Catskills, FEMA opened disaster recovery centers throughout the county. According to spokesman Peter Limbesis, more than $90 million has been distributed to victims so far. That same level of assistance can't be said of temporary housing.
You understand, though, that as government, we don't want to, we have to follow the rules and the regulations. So we can take a housing unit and put it in a 100-year-old floodplain.
Officials say they do understand, but are urging some urgency, especially when hundreds are still without their homes.
Some people are still a bit intense. Some people have been in their cars, they've been with in-laws, some still in motel rooms, and others living on the second floor of their buildings, not buttoned up for winter, no heat.
As of 9 weeks after the storm, Lembesis says out of 90 available trailers, only 10 are occupied. In the meantime, residents also have their livelihoods to think about. Terry says the business community took a big hit, and bouncing back is easier said than done with absentee landlords and insurance company loopholes.
It's just slow. I mean, here it is November. This event occurred in August, and we still have businesses that are questionable whether or not they're going to return.
Agriculture, the staple of the county, is also struggling. Terry says vegetable and fruit farmers lost nearly all their crops this season, forcing them to close their stands or bring in replacement produce to stay open. As for dairy farmers, she says they're struggling to provide feed for their cows after supplies were washed away.
There's a new normal in Schoharie County. We will not be going back to business as usual. It will not be reestablishing a normal that we had prior to that fateful Sunday in August.
Alongside getting people back in their homes and lights back on in businesses, local leaders also have some long-term goals in mind. One in particular, Terry says, is a long time coming.
Providers have indicated to us that they don't feel there's enough of a market, to warrant establishment of the appropriate antennas here.
And that's despite already existing infrastructure. County officials hope providers reconsider and put people over profits.
There were critical communications that needed to travel both from the field into the emergency operations center as well as back out that just couldn't happen because there was this lack of cell phone coverage.
But while some continue to plan for the future, many more are taking care of the present. Through fashion, fundraising, volunteerism, and donations, people are helping each other.
It's just kind of emotional because it's just amazing what people can do. It's amazing what people can come together and help when we really need it.
After all, home is where the love is.
This is the scene in Shandaken on Sunday, August 28th. A Mount Tremper resident of 20 years describes it as the worst flooding ever witnessed.
I saw cars in the water, I saw trailers in the water, I saw complete houses, devastation. People couldn't get over the bridge to get home.
The Route 28 bridge crossing the Esopus Creek and connecting the rest of the town temporarily closes. Asphalt torn apart and the steel sides mangled among trees, making one of two ways into Phoenicia impassable. And the Coldbrook Bridge completely washes away.
We thought it was wedged up against the Five Arches Bridge in Boyceville. The undersheriff and I went there and looked. Not only was it not there, it wasn't downstream either.
Tropical Storm Irene makes history in the county, leaving her mark on many of Ulster's more than 1,000 miles. The path cut by the raging rapids of the upper Esopus Creek, 12 feet above flood stage, can be seen by helicopter. Sheriff's deputies make at least 25 emergency rescues from homes surrounded by swift-moving water. More than 5 people are inside as water moves this house more than 100 yards from the foundation.
They're technical rescues, where we have to put men and equipment in the water, not just evacuating people. These were people that were actually trapped, and I was there on most of those. If our people did not get them out, probably most of them would have perished.
The tropical storm claims no lives in Ulster County, but leaves hundreds stranded. Water cuts a crater in Oliveria Road, cutting off access to campers and staff at the Frost Valley YMCA. Rescue crews use ATVs to reach people in Big Indian, waiting without power, internet, and cell service. By Wednesday, almost everyone is accounted for.
We have 95% complete The houses and welfare checks that we've had on our list, gone through residence by residence with the assistance of several agencies.
Those that are able to get out seek refuge at Bel Air Mountain. The ski lodge turns into an emergency shelter, providing sleeping arrangements for more than 200 people and 20 pets. Staff serve as many as 3,000 meals a day, and the state and federal government send resources to help with rescue and recovery. Helicopters carrying supplies make several stops on the mountain.
We have more than half the state agencies, those critical to the day-to-day needs for both the community and local governments, are here represented.
As a result of Irene, Ulster County is one of 4 counties in the Hudson Valley declared a disaster area. In Shandaken, the Highway Department deals with about $3.5 million in damages, and the supervisor spends more than $100,000 on other costs.
Extra time for a police department, emergency services, ambulance department.
Almost 3 months later, and crews are still at work. Machines moving rock and debris to rebuild the dike that broke behind Town Hall. And although a footbridge allows access to the other side of this washout, the giant hole still needs to be filled in. Homes once filled with floodwaters need to be demolished.
We understand, the state of everyone's mind right now, and it is a hard time to deal with it, and knowing cold weather's coming, but we've got to work on really trying to clear up these areas.
And with cold weather, Stanley anticipates snowy weather. He says that bridges and businesses are open and ready for ski season.
We're recovering. People are pretty resilient, here in the high Catskills.
At the height of this year's hurricane season, Irene left her mark on the southern tier, wreaking havoc on the Delaware River, causing major flooding in places like Margaretville and Fleischmann.
You see it all over the country, and you see everybody else suffer, and you don't think about it until it happens right next door to you.
But even after the water from Irene receded, rivers, streams, and creeks were still high due to the amount of water the hurricane left behind, something that would play a major factor when another storm pounded the area less than 2 weeks later. On September 7th, some 5 years after one of the worst natural disasters on record flooded much of the southern tier, history was repeating itself all over again.
We had floods, but nothing to this degree. We had water running out of the manhole covers, but now it's a river going down the street, and the creek has now transformed itself into something that we don't want to see. Nothing on this scale.
We are shocked. Never seen it like this. Never water like this up to this level.
Residents all over the area were forced to leave nearly everything they had behind as their homes were overrun with water.
It's gone. It's underwater, along with my mother's and everybody else's.
Nearly 7.5 inches of rain pounded the area on September 7th, with an additional 1.5 inches coming down the following day. When all was said and done, the Susquehanna River crested at record levels, more than 25 feet in Binghamton, more than 35 in Vestal, and nearly 40 feet in Owego.
We're thinking it's 5 to 10 times worse is how it's affected the city of Binghamton as the 2006 flood.
In the days that followed, major roadways were deemed impassable, schools shut down, and states of emergency were issued throughout the southern tier, leaving waiting, hoping, and praying for the best as the only options for residents in the midst of the disaster.
Incredible stories and incredible video captured by our YNN team. Well, when we come back, we're going to change gears a little bit, go from the big picture to a more focused look at how some individuals are handling the storms.
Back to After the Storm. Now, here's Steve Ferentz.
Welcome back. I'm Steve Ferentz. Of course, as epic as the flooding was, it can be easy to lose focus of those individuals and families who were impacted by the storms. Many lost everything and are still struggling to come to grips with what happened and even how to move forward. I spoke with one such family in the village of Schoharie. Melissa Kakarika spoke with another in Vestal.
Everybody has a story.
2 weeks after Tropical Storm Irene dumped inches of rain in hours on the 1,300 people living in the village of Schoharie, it's been the story of utter destruction. If at first the fear had been the damaging winds, that fear was quickly washed away by the 10 or more inches that fell on nearby towns and villages. Water with nowhere to go but into the Schoharie Creek that raged above its banks, looking for victims far beyond its yearly floodplain.
They can have 4 feet of snow of a snowpack, and when that thaws, you know, then we get floods, hard floods in the spring.
But not like this.
But not like this, no.
Some have called it the second 100-year flood in 15 years. Others say this was a 500-year event. 76-year-old Betsy Guernsey simply says it's far beyond what she ever thought possible.
We had a sudden surge in water here late Sunday afternoon into the evening. And you could see the water was high, but it was flowing and it was not any problem. And then suddenly the surge came through and you could see the water rise like 2 to 3 feet in like half an hour.
There were the concerns about the Gilboa Dam. It holds back billions of gallons of water upstream, casting a shadow of unease over the valley. Ironically, that fear helped Betsy and her neighbors to evacuate quickly. But she left everything behind, never thinking the water would get so high.
I would say probably about here.
So the water was up to our shoulders?
Yeah.
So many homes in the village tell the same story. Some saw their foundations ripped apart, but mostly the damage is deceiving, like a dollhouse shaken on the inside, appearing untouched from the outside. First floors filled with water, a thick slippery mud clinging to everything, claiming those things we hold dearest.
This used to be my husband's closet where he kept thousands and thousands of slide files from his trip to South America many years ago. Threw them away. It was just too much. All the pictures of Lake George when the kids were little, that they're history.
Water and mud, not just taking tangible memories of her late husband, but also taking away current friends, too.
A wonderful lady came and picked her up and took her to Clifton Park. I had an orange cat. She's probably better off there, I would say.
After the Schoharie Creek ran through Main Street, it seems there wasn't any part of village life left untouched. The banks in town destroyed. A mobile ATM setup was the only way to access precious cash for the basic necessities. The lower floor of the courthouse destroyed. Operations moved elsewhere. Businesses on Main Street destroyed. Equipment unsalvageable. What was the Great American Grocery Store before the economy shut it down has become the village dump. It's where all the water heaters, countless refrigerators, and soaked business supplies sit as a quiet testament to the damage inside each building. Another flooding casualty, Betsy's family business, Guernsey's Schoharie Nurseries.
The office is wrecked. The outbuildings are wrecked. Some of the equipment that had motors were not removed and taken to higher ground.
With so much lost, Betsy knows it would be a daunting challenge to restore the 100-year-old business now run by her son. Basically, it would be starting over.
Who wants to buy a shrub that's got Schoharie Valley mud all over it, dried mud at this point?
And just down the street, 2 weeks after Irene's flooding, 2 weeks after everyone here had no idea where to even begin, there is progress. Of course, that progress is very slow. You can see bucket after bucket being taken out of a hole in the foundation in this house, thick mud, and it's going to take weeks, if not months, to finish the job.
Most of these beautiful old homes are owned and populated by people in their late 60s and 70s, maybe even older, and lots of them are just plain single. The husband or the wife is gone, and that's what we're faced with. These people across the way, they're in their 80s. You know, what to do? You kind of run out of money at that stage in life.
And many folks didn't have flood insurance because this type of flooding just doesn't happen.
My husband was so proud of the fact that he was about maybe 3 inches above the stage, above the minimum where you had to have flood insurance.
Her house is paid off, but it's still a question of how much she's willing to put into rebuilding it, because she could see flooding again. In the meantime, her house was gutted by volunteers who knew people like Betsy might need help ripping out the soaked sheetrock, a magnet for mold. Still in shock a couple weeks after the storm, She had no idea if she would leave her home since 1957 or not.
So I am left with a shell, and I don't know what to do with my shell. I think it's beyond me right now. I would love to say I'm strong enough to do it, but I don't think I am.
With her emotions still raw, with the loss of everything she owned, Betsy Guernsey never thought she would be sharing the story of the tough decisions she's been left with, to leave her home and village behind, or to rebuild. And either way, starting over in her mid-70s. An impossible question shared by so many others across the region.
When Rita and Chris Doolittle left in their RV on vacation, nothing could prepare them for what they would come home to.
It wasn't a house anymore. It looked like a sewer dump. It smelled so bad that I wanted to throw up all the way through. It was just horrible. My husband and I, we cried through the whole thing. I don't know how much we saw and what we didn't see because we couldn't.
Their home, like countless others, destroyed by floodwaters in early September.
You see this stuff on the news and you don't really feel it till it happens to you. And when it happens to you, you go, oh.
The Doolittles are residents of the Twin Orchards area in Vestal. They've lived in their home since 2001 and like others in the area were blindsided by the flood damage this time around.
I think that's the hardest thing, is to feel the pain all around you. Hugging people that you don't even know, but you know they're hurting.
With nothing left to do but clean up, they are picking up the pieces one room at a time.
We've been cutting wood out and taking insulation out and ripping floors up. And
I don't know which is harder, throwing out all your precious things one at a time or just walk away.
With no flood insurance, the Doolittles are relying heavily on the FEMA funding they received to make their house a home again.
We got to get a new furnace, new hot water heater, new electrical panel.
For now, the RV in their driveway has become their home.
I've always tried to live one day at a time. Now it's one moment at a time.
It's going to be a long haul and it's going to be rough, but we'll make it.
With no plans to leave their property, the Doolittles will continue to occupy their driveway as they work on getting back in their home.
All right, thank you, Melissa. And of course, we'll be checking back a little later on in the show with those families to see where their lives are at. In the meantime, it's perhaps impossible to prevent such flooding, and it's almost impossible to prepare for such events. At the same time, a little preparation can go a long way. Our Ryan Peterson has some of the basics.
The late summer weather we experienced this year was historic, and while a hurricane making landfall in the Northeast isn't unheard of, it is a rare event. And whether you live along the banks of the Hudson, the Mohawk, the Susquehanna, or any one of the dozens of creeks or streams across the state, Mother Nature has reminded us once again of how important it is to be prepared. And preparing all starts with your insurance policy.
Homeowners insurance covers structure, your home, your dwelling structure, and any unattached structures on your property. It covers your personal property, all your belongings. It covers you for liability in case you are sued.
The one thing it doesn't cover is flood damage.
Flood insurance is a separate policy from your homeowner's policy or your renter's policy that covers damage specifically related to sudden rise in water. And it's an area that is flooded, not a specific home necessarily. And it's purchased through independent carriers, for example, National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, and it is not included in your homeowner's or renter's insurance.
Many of you saw your homes disappear under the floodwaters. Some of you even saw your homes completely washed away. Now, unfortunately, there is no defense to either of those situations. And then again, this summer was a once-in-a-lifetime event. But installing a dry basement system may be just a ticket moving forward.
When you put in a system into a basement with a sump pump, you want to size the pump correctly based on the area that it's in, information you get from a customer about how much water they've had in the past, We do sump pumps where we install just one pump. We have systems where we have 6 to 8 pumps in one basement.
If you live along the river or any other extremely flood-prone area, a lone sump pump, according to Koval, isn't going to cut it.
A sump pump alone is not going to keep your basement dry, but having a full perimeter system, getting the water to the pump and then pumping it out is what the heart of the system is. A basement should stay dry if you have a proper system with sump pumps. The ultimate system is to have a backup generator, automatic start backup generator with 2 pumps installed.
Now, should any floor of your house flood, you should know that there are companies out there who will work with your insurance to make your house livable again. Professional restoration crews will work with you every step of the way to make your house a home again.
It's easy to go in and see the water sitting there on carpets and floors and getting that out of there. Our main concern is what's behind the walls. If you leave the walls sitting there and everything untreated behind there, there's no airflow, it's moist back there, then the mold starts to grow. And when the mold starts to grow, it turns into a simple 2 or 3, 4 day process into months of mold remediation and rebuild.
To avoid any kind of lengthy remediation procedures, DJ wants you to take 2 steps immediately following any flood.
They want to call their insurance agent or their insurance carrier to let them know they've just had a flood, to get the ball rolling on that end. But they also want to put a phone call into a company like mine so we can get out there that night or that day.
It's pretty straightforward stuff. However, flood insurance policies can be tricky. So take some time to talk with your insurance agent about it.
Thanks, Ryan. When we come back, how did New York State's leaders respond to one of the worst disasters ever to hit New York State? And Capital Tonight's Nick Reisman talks with an RPI professor who says New York's infrastructure simply couldn't take another hit from another major set of storms.
Back to After the Storm. Now, here's Steve Ferentz.
Welcome back to After the Storm. In a time of crisis, we often look to our political leaders for swift reaction and relief coordination. In fact, how the political apparatus responds often defines how all-encompassing a disaster can be seen in retrospect. And for this state, it fell upon Governor Andrew Cuomo to lead the state through the high waters. A key member of his administration who sat down with our Bill Carey to talk about those decisions made after all that flooding.
The summer of 2011 is drawing to a close, and Andrew Cuomo is doing what governors do to help usher out the season. He's touring the New York State Fair. But as he greets fairgoers and visits exhibits, Cuomo's keeping tabs on a visitor New York hoped would not pay a call, Hurricane Irene.
Today I'll be declaring a state of emergency that will allow the state government more flexibility in getting prepared.
Cuomo, who was due to leave the fair for a fundraiser, instead heads back to the Capitol, where he gives his cabinet their marching orders. At his side is Lieutenant Governor Robert Duffy.
All his cabinet members, they were deployed around the state. I was assigned to New York City and Long Island on the day of the hurricane and the day after.
The focus had been on New York City, the state bracing for a possible catastrophic strike. When the storm passed, less lethally than expected, much of the nation turned its attention elsewhere, thinking the worst was over. But for the administration, the worst had just begun.
We got back Sunday night to Albany late. We had a conference call at 11 o'clock at night. I had talked to 1 or 2 mayors from one of the affected areas. Margaretville was one. And I remember one of the mayors saying that the residents on his main street were on, actually the water was up to the rooftops of the first floor. And you really got a sense of how devastating the damage is. And the damage was just, it's hard to describe. People lost everything. The core of the storm was expected to be much more downstate. But the true water damage, the long-term effects really were in several of the upstate communities.
The state was just beginning to make progress in its comeback from Irene when another unwanted visitor arrived, Tropical Storm Lee, the target of heavy rains and floods, again upstate. The job for the state grew more intense.
When you are sitting outside your home is destroyed, all your possessions are ruined because the water has been up in some cases to the second story. When you have no car, no house, no electricity, no power, and basically not a lot of resource or money just for yourself to just pick up and move, That's when I think the state did some great things. I mean, the state came in, and I have to say this, Bill, that during a very, very tough economic time, the state really has no extra money, so to speak. It certainly is being stretched very thin financially, as everyone realizes. But the governor made a point to look at mobilizing everything we could, from furnaces to emergency housing. The issue of FEMA, that was one issue. People needed temporary housing. And there's a process FEMA has to go through. Well, the governor did a great job in trying to speed that up and make that as customer-friendly as possible, because people had to get into a home. The repair of roads and bridges, when you have infrastructure knocked out, when people can't drive to their neighbors or drive to work, when roads or bridges are out, it causes a whole different reaction. Route 73 up in the Keene Valley. When that bridge was down, the expectation, and the governor, I remember Governor being there when he was told it'll be 6 weeks before that can be repaired. Well, anyone who knows Governor Cuomo knows that's the wrong answer. That bridge was a lifeblood to not only the Keene Valley, Lake Placid, that Saranac Lake area, tourism, all the issues in terms of economics that really hit that area would have been devastated without that. I think in 6 days or less that bridge was open. When you are without these basic needs, every hour seems like a month. So no matter how fast things go, there will still be a level of frustration among people because it just doesn't happen enough or fast enough.
People tend to think once the waters recede that the emergency is over. Where do we stand in terms of doing the needed rebuilding and repairs in the aftermath of both Irene and Tropical Storm Lee?
I think we are in a position of probably being as in a good place as we possibly can be. I would say about 90% or more of all the roads and bridges have been open and restored and fixed. There's a handful that are on point right now to be fixed and scheduled. I think the Department of Transportation has done a phenomenal job in terms of their response, because in both storms, they were, and throw in the early snowstorm this year, they were stretched to the limit. You have homes that are still damaged. You have companies that are damaged. I was on a visit down to Broome County. There are some significant employers down there who we need to stay here in New York State, who are making decisions as we speak, and we're working very hard to make sure they stay in the southern tier, keep those jobs here. Touring some of these areas with the governor and with our teams, you get a sense of just how devastating these disasters can be. And each house that has been destroyed, that's a mom and a dad and kids who can't go back in that home, who may not have the resource or bank account to go out and buy a new home, who are just relying on government to help them.
Has the state reviewed at all what infrastructure is in place to mitigate flood damage, and what kind of steps may be needed in some of these areas to perhaps minimize the impact should we run into a situation where we have another storm pass through next spring, next summer?
Bill, it's a great point, because not only in the past we think of these elongated time frames between disasters, who knows what to expect next year or the year after. There are things going on. There is work being done with our own DEC, with the Army Corps of Engineers to look and make evaluations in areas. There has to be work done along the rivers and creek beds in terms of not only clearing debris, but perhaps making some structural changes and trying to fill in areas.
It is going to be costly.
It's going to be very costly. But those are things that the governor is leading and overseeing. And I won't sit here and say that every step will be taken to satisfy every area and every issue, every potential issue. But I think everything within reason is being examined right now and trying to align the agencies. And I think what you're seeing, I would call it's good government. It's aligning all the resources, focusing on a mission, going out and trying to bring everything you can to bear to help people in a time of need.
It's a job Duffy thinks the administration has done well.
I've never seen the depth or the responsiveness of that response from Albany or in the state in my previous 2 careers as I have this time. And it makes me feel very proud.
Thanks, Bill. Of course, taking the brunt of the damage, the state's roads and bridges and other infrastructure. Capitol Tonight's Nick Reisman talked with one expert who says that infrastructure likely couldn't withstand the winds and rain that come with storms of such magnitude.
The torrent of rain from tropical storms Irene and Lee caused massive damage across New York. Roads and bridges were washed out, and the fragile infrastructure of some communities was stretched to the max. State officials, however, say progress has been made.
Over 400 roads and bridges in the immediate aftermath of the storm that were closed on the state highway system. Within 10 days of Hurricane Irene, 170 of those had reopened. Within 10 days of Tropical Storm Lee, another 200 had opened. As of today, 98% of the roads and bridges have reopened.
Thomas Zimmy, a professor of engineering at RPI, says paved roads and bridges in both urban and rural areas were hit with what amounted to be a double whammy.
And then all of a sudden Hurricane Lee comes around, and even though it wasn't a big effect here, all of a sudden it was just enough, boom, and it takes out the road. And the road would have, probably been okay if the extra rain didn't come along.
But state officials overseeing cleanup from the flood damage say infrastructure improvements can be made.
I think in some ways it's an opportunity to look at infrastructure long term, predicting that perhaps we'll have other events that will have the same amount of rainfall and snowmelt and so forth. So figuring out how infrastructure is re-engineered to handle those amounts of water, I think, provides an opportunity for the long term and for those communities.
But what about the next major flooding event? Zimmy says infrastructure just can't be built to handle such flooding.
You give people enough money, we can design anything you want, but you can't afford to do that. So the big 500-year storm comes along, it's going to cause a lot of damage, and it did. And if it comes again, it's going to cause a lot more damage. You can't really afford to be protecting everything against a 500-year storm.
State officials estimate that damage from both storms combined will cost $1 billion.
Capital Tonight's Nick Reisman reporting. Thanks, Nick. When we return from this break, we will revisit the folks we introduced to you earlier and tell you where their lives are at now, 3 months after the storm.
Back to After the Storm. Now, here's Steve Ferentz.
When lives are turned upside down, as so many were in those late summer months, it can be tough to see a path back to normalcy. Almost 3 months after the storms hit, we went back to those families we introduced to you earlier in the show to see if their lives were back on track or if their lives were still being dominated by the floods.
I didn't know where to begin, and I began by walking out.
We revisited Betsy Guernsey more than 2 months after she lost everything in the worst flooding ever seen in the village of Schoharie. She struggled with whether to leave the destruction behind or to rebuild.
You know what happened here in Schoharie in particular was people were just mind-boggled by the destruction. And when you look at your house and you realize that for many people to bring it back the way it was is going to cost more than the house was worth. So a lot of people have thought, I can't do that, it's too late in life.
She considered buying property on higher ground or leaving the village altogether. But as you can probably already tell, we met her in her house because she just couldn't leave it all behind.
And you are sticking around.
Oh yeah. For this time, if we flood again, it's bye-bye.
She says her family has lived here for hundreds of years and doesn't think flooding like this will happen again. So she's willing to take one more chance.
But that was a freak storm. It's my opinion that it was the perfect storm, similar to the one that hit the East Coast, New England. There was a series of events that came together that allowed that hurricane to almost stop dead in its tracks in this valley.
Now it's the painstaking work of cleaning every inch of her home. New electrical wires have been put in. Charity workers installed insulation in the walls.
We have water, we don't have hot water, we don't have the furnace going, and the furnace won't be going until we get the water pipes to the second floor.
These the first steps. As Betsy expects to stay with family for months, her house still uninhabitable, especially with the winter weather setting in. As for her beloved village, there are some signs of progress. The need for that temporary ATM truck parked on Main Street has passed, but courthouse operations still run out of another building. Signs on business windows tell customers to call for appointments, but others, dusty from the dried mud, tell of businesses closing their doors for good. And then there's Betsy's family business, Guernsey's Schoharie Nursery.
The office is down to the studs, as I was. He lost a lot of equipment. He lost a lot of the stuff that he dug. That was in the fields about a half-mile away, so he's going to start again.
If you're going to ask anyone about how many people will be staying here or how many people will leave the mess behind, Betsy is probably the one to ask. She has her finger on the pulse of the village. She knows most people by their first name. Her husband was even the mayor for 20-plus years, and she says that most people now have decided to stay. You can even hear the reverberations of hammers coming from almost every house in her neighborhood.
The village, I don't know how long it's going to take to recoup. The people who really thought, I can't do this, I'm getting out, have reconsidered and are sticking around, fixing up gradually. Maybe they're going into their savings, and maybe they're doing it with a lot of friends. FEMA has been very, very helpful.
She says there are a number of people, especially middle-aged couples, who have already left, avoiding any future flooding. But this Thanksgiving, Betsy Guernsey is thankful for her family and for living in a village she's confident will stand again.
Everybody is pulling together. They want to succeed. We have had meetings about where do we go from here, how can we put the village back, what are some of the things that need to be addressed now rather than wait, and we have some good younger minds that are doing that work.
Glimmers of hope, of renewal from the inside out, a story about not knowing where to begin after losing so much, but also a story about how time does begin to heal, even after flooding that still seems so unimaginable.
More than 2 months after floodwaters ripped through the region, Rita and Chris Doolittle are finally out of their RV and back in their home.
Today, we are actually the first day in our house. We put a mattress upstairs and we're staying in tonight.
Since September, the couple has continued the process of rebuilding their home.
We've poured new cement floors and we've torn down the walls.
I'd say we're probably 2/3 of the way through, okay, from the entire process, from gutting it to building it back up. So we've got the final third to go.
Now they are focused on sorting through what they were able to salvage from the flood.
You know, we have to go through everything because we had to get rid of so much. I don't even know what we've got.
Although it's been a long process, the family is finally starting to feel like things are getting back to normal.
At first, it just seemed way overwhelming. It felt too much. It felt like this can't be fixed, this can't be done. But, you know, with time comes hope.
Even though the family is spending this Thanksgiving at a restaurant, they are looking forward to the future.
Next Thanksgiving, it'll be back to normal again, where we have a house full of people and a big dinner and things like that.
For now, they are just thankful that they've come this far.
And an important reminder to pass along to you. The deadline to register with FEMA for disaster assistance or with the SBA for low-interest disaster loans is December 15th. For more information on that and even a resource page, just head to ynn.com. Finally tonight, a tribute of sorts. The storms took so much from so many, but they also took something from each of us. National treasures that lay hidden on New York's landscape, literally bridging the past and the present. Lost in the raging rivers were two of New York State's historic covered bridges, symbols of a time gone by that we will never get back.
Donna Freeland, and I'm president of the New York State Covered Bridge Society. We're kind of like a social organization as far as being concerned and making sure that the bridges are kept up as much as they can be. Most of the time people say, I didn't even know there was this kind of a society in New York, because they don't even know that we have the number of bridges that we do, which we don't come anywhere near Vermont that has over 100. We did have 24, and now we're down to 22. We've had several bridges with minor damage, but we totally lost 2. We lost the world's longest single-span, double-barreled bridge that was up in Schoharie County called the Blenheim Covered Bridge. It just totally vanished. We're not sure what's going to happen with that, whether they're going to try to rebuild a replica, because there's not enough original timber that they're going to be able to use to actually remake the bridge. So we're not sure what's going to happen to that. Tuscarora Club, which is a hunting club up in Delaware County, has a part of one of the original covered bridges on their property, and that's now gone. All that's left is the deck, but they're planning on rebuilding a bridge there as well. And then there's a couple others that have had minor damage. There's a private one in Ulster County that's pretty badly damaged, but the man that owns the bridge says he's going to make sure it gets taken care of. Ulster County has a couple of damaged bridges, Delaware County and Sullivan County and Schoharie County. Vermont lost 2 bridges, New Hampshire lost 1, Pennsylvania lost 1 or 2 in the second storm that came through. So all these states have had devastation as far as the covered bridges go, more probably than since the beginning of the early 1900s when they had some really bad floods. Got the oldest covered bridge in the entire United States in New York, and that's the Hyde Hall Covered Bridge up in outside of Cooperstown in Glimmerglass State Park. Everybody asks why covered bridges are covered, you know, and you have all kinds of ideas, but basically what it is when they built them back then, wood was the most available natural resource and the cheapest. And the reason they covered the bridges was not so that lovers could go in there and smooch without anybody seeing them, or keeping the horses from getting angsty when they go over the water, but it was to protect the deck of the bridge, because it was a lot less expensive to replace the roof on a bridge than it would be for the base of the bridge. I think too much today, the kids aren't learning the history or appreciating the history of things that came before us. The workmanship and stuff that just went into it, the kids need to see things and appreciate what's come before them. You know, everything isn't a handheld machine in front of them that they're texting and everything else on. It's just down home roots stuff. It's really important. It's important to me, and I would think that the kids at least need to be exposed to it so that they see what's there. It's peaceful, it's calm, it's just a place you want to go and just reflect and just get away from all the craziness that's out there. And it's like going away into Neverland. You don't want to go back.
And that's going to do it for After the Storm. We hope this show has provided you with some perspective. And of course, YNN will hope to continue to tell these stories that matter so much to the families, communities, and individuals who are impacted by all the destruction. Folks who also now look for a full recovery. I'm Steve Ferentz. Thanks for watching.